Long ago, this was the home of Salem's most brutal man, an executioner who tortured and killed dozens of women accused of witchcraft. His name was George Corwin, and he never showed remorse. They say his victims didn't leave this place for the grave, but for the darkness, dragged away with crushed throats and screams no one outside ever heard. A modern building stands here now, the Joshua Ward House. But the walls that rise there today feel the same terror that lived here 3 centuries ago. People report shadows moving through the halls, faces appearing in photographs, and cold hands touching their necks. Just like Corwin once did, this place doesn't forget, and it doesn't let the living forget either. Before we continue, I'd appreciate your subscription. Now, let's return to the story. Some houses simply stand on their foundations. Some keep history. But the Joshua Ward House keeps those who never left. The first people who entered after construction sensed something wrong before they even crossed the threshold. The air around the doorway felt thicker, heavier, as if the building itself didn't want to be disturbed. Architects called it Salem humidity. But several workers refused to go inside, even before the house was finished. One swore he saw the face of a woman in the second-floor window, at a time when the building still had no interior walls. No one believed him, but that was only the beginning. Early reports mention a strange smell drifting through the corridors: ash, damp earth, iron, and something that resembled fear. A smell that couldn't be explained by anything modern, as if the walls remembered what the ground beneath them had seen. And that ground had seen far too much. Just a few feet below the polished floors of the new building stood the old home of Sheriff George Corwin, the most feared executioner in Salem. He was not known as a servant of the law. Even judges avoided his gaze. He strangled, crushed, and pressed throats with such force that his victims lost their voices long before they lost their lives. And when they died, they collapsed onto this very soil. When the Ward House opened, no one spoke of that past. But everyone noticed the same thing. The house was always cold. Even on the hottest days, a freezing draft followed people down the hallways, as if someone stood behind them, breathing down their necks. As if the new house wasn't simply built. It was born out of old suffering. And although, officially, this was the beginning of a new life for the building, in truth, it was the moment it woke up. To understand why the Joshua Ward House became one of the darkest homes in America, you have to return to a time when this land was not just a plot. It was an execution ground. Sheriff George Corwin earned his reputation not as a man of the law, but as someone who turned interrogations into punishment long before a verdict was ever spoken. Townspeople called him the Strangler, though no one dared say it while he lived. Salem's records describe his methods in cold, emotionless lines: arrest, suspicion, death. But those who lived through that era knew the truth. Corwin wasn't searching for confessions. He was manufacturing fear. Justice wasn't his goal. Control was. In his yard, right here, beneath the floors of the modern house, stood wooden beams, iron rings set into stone, heavy weights, and ropes. These weren't judicial tools. They were instruments he used to test the accused. And once someone was brought to Corwin, Salem understood. They might not return alive. Stories spread quietly, whispered from house to house. Some accused of witchcraft were left lying on the cold ground for hours while Corwin waited to see if God would intervene. Others were kept restrained so long that they drifted in and out of consciousness before he ever asked a single question. Witnesses wrote that people didn't walk out of his custody. They staggered out, broken, trembling, half empty. And some never walked out at all. Residents claimed that Corwin had his own nighttime procedures. They spoke of lights burning in his windows long after dark, of metallic clangs, muffled thuds, and sounds that resembled breathless crying no one dared investigate. In Salem, asking questions about Corwin was dangerous. Even after his death, the land remained marked. It felt as if the soil had absorbed every scream, every moment of fear, every life that ended here. And when the Joshua Ward house was built directly on top of that ground, the older townspeople only shook their heads. You cannot build over this. What Corwin did here doesn't go away. So when the new home's first residents began hearing slow, heavy footsteps in empty hallways, people didn't ask who it was. They whispered, "He's back." And he walks the way he always did, slow and certain. The earliest strange events inside the Joshua Ward house were never written into official reports. No one wanted to put them on record. But the people who worked here after construction remembered them for the rest of their lives. They spoke of a presence in the house, and it didn't sound like superstition. It sounded like a warning. Several workers refused to step into the basement even before the building officially opened. One said he felt something pass beside him, cold, heavy, like a pocket of frozen air with weight. He heard a sharp exhale right next to his ear. When the foreman turned on the lamp, dust fell from the ceiling in a thick cloud, even though the basement had no drafts. The man quit that same day. During an inspection of the second floor, a supervisor noticed a male figure at the end of the hall, standing perfectly still, like a shadow cut out of the air. The description was consistent: broad shoulders, dark silhouette, no visible details of the face. When the supervisor took a step toward it, the figure seemed to sink into the wall and vanished. This encounter is considered the first documented sighting of the silhouette, many later connected to Sheriff Corwin. In one of the offices, workers began reporting a recurring smell, a mix of hot metal, ash, and something disturbingly similar to dried blood. The vents were clean, the fireplace was inactive, the wiring new. Yet the scent kept returning, always in that same room. Historians later noted that this spot aligned with one of Corwin's original interrogation areas in the 17th century. During the first private tour, one woman claimed she felt fingers touching her shoulder, light, cold, barely noticeable. The guide dismissed it until a clear indentation appeared on the fabric where she said the hand had been. Moments later, she saw something in the mirror. A blurred figure behind her, shaped like an overexposed photograph. When she turned around, nobody was there. But the most disturbing incident took place in a second-floor room. A housekeeper had just wiped the window, closed it, and stepped out. When she returned 2 minutes later, a handprint was on the glass, but not a human one. The fingers were longer, thinner, and the imprint felt cold, as if the glass had frozen in that one spot. These were only the first warnings. The house wasn't trying to show itself. It was reminding them that another building once stood on this soil, and another man. If the Ward house felt merely cold during the day, at night it became something entirely different, alive, alert, and watchful. The staff quickly learned that the most disturbing events happened after midnight, when the street outside grew silent and the old walls began to breathe. One of the first to notice this was a night guard who worked in the building for 2 weeks. Every night he recorded strange sounds in his logbook: soft footsteps on the stairs, the creaking of doors, thuds from the upper floor, even though every room was locked. At first, he assumed it was drafts or settling wood. But when he heard a quiet, distinct whisper in the hallway speak his name, he placed his keys on the desk and never returned. A cleaning worker, who finished her shifts after sunset, spoke of shadows appearing where no source of light could cast them. She saw one of them move, slowly, gliding across the floor without touching it. The shadow was narrow, tall, resembling the silhouette of a person with their head bowed. What terrified her most was that it moved toward the light, not away from it. On the 3rd floor, in a small room near the staircase, people often heard crying. Not loud, muffled, like the voice of a child hiding. The sound came from an empty space, with no furniture, no ventilation, and no windows to carry echoes. One paranormal investigator later recorded a short clip capturing the whimpering and a strained, wheezing breath, something that sounded like someone struggling to take a final inhale. In the hallway on the 1st floor stood a large antique mirror, one of the few original pieces left from the 19th century. Blurred faces often appeared on it, distorted as though caught on a damaged camera. The worst incident came when an employee saw the reflection of a man in dark clothing standing directly behind her. When she spun around, the hallway was empty, but the imprint of his shape lingered in the mirror for several seconds, like a delayed image on a dying screen. By dawn, the house would grow still again, as if the night belonged to something beneath the floorboards, something that came out only to breathe. When the Joshua Ward House first opened its doors to tourists, the owners didn't expect that most people would come not for the colonial history of Salem, but for whatever remained in these walls after Corwin's death. And almost immediately it became clear. Visitors were seeing things the staff had missed for years. One of the earliest reports came from a middle-aged woman standing near the old staircase on the 2nd floor. She had been photographing architectural details when she suddenly froze. Her hands began to tremble. On the small screen of her camera, she saw a figure, tall, female, dressed in a long black gown. The figure stood directly behind her, but what made the woman drop the camera was the face. It had none, just a pale, empty surface where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. When she turned around, the hallway was empty. Yet the faceless figure remained in the camera's image for several more seconds before vanishing. Another visitor, a young man fascinated by witch trial history, claimed he saw a male silhouette on the 3rd floor, a shape resembling a person with a rope-like mark around the neck, motionless, but with the head tilted at an impossible angle, as if the neck could no longer support it. An artist in the group quickly sketched what they saw, and that drawing later became one of the most unsettling images associated with the house. A woman from Massachusetts fainted in the 1st floor lobby after she felt someone push her shoulder. Security footage later revealed that a shadow had indeed moved behind her. Thin, fast, nearly flat against the wall. It glided toward her, paused, and then vanished in a split second. But the most infamous event occurred when a group of Boston students took a photo near a window on the 3rd floor. The image, later published in local media, shocked even skeptics. A woman's face with hollow eyes pressed against the glass from the inside, as if she were trying to force her way out. That was the moment the Joshua Ward House stopped being just a historic landmark. It became a place where nothing wants to stay inside, but nothing seems able to leave. After the wave of disturbing reports, the owners of the Joshua Ward House allowed a team of paranormal investigators inside. It was during their visit that the house revealed manifestations that could no longer be dismissed as tricks of light or imagination. The building wasn't just reacting, it was interacting, and it was doing so deliberately. The first incident occurred in the narrow hallway on the second floor. A researcher holding a thermal camera stopped abruptly when the device captured a shape. A cold imprint of a hand gripping her arm just above the elbow. The temperature dropped by nearly 40 degrees in that single spot. She gasped, and the rest of the team saw clear marks on her skin. 5 long impressions, as though someone had grabbed her firmly. The marks vanished as suddenly as they appeared. Another investigator, a man in his 40s, described a sensation he could barely articulate. Like someone wrapped a hand around my throat from behind. For several seconds, he couldn't speak. Only a strained, rasping breath came out, as if the air had been drained from his lungs. No one was near him, yet a camera pointed in his direction recorded a dark, vertical shadow passing behind him. Thick, heavy, and dense enough to block the light. In the main hall, the team used an EVP recorder. To the question, "Who is here?" a response came seconds later. A low, strained, fragmented word that resembled Corwin. One team member later said the voice sounded as if it was produced by something that didn't have air in its chest to speak with. But the most unsettling event took place in the basement. That area had always been colder than the rest of the house, but that night the air turned frigid, cold enough for the team's breath to fog. As they moved toward the far wall, the thermal camera revealed the outline of a human figure. Broad shoulders, a lowered head, standing motionless. The outline didn't move, but the edges pulsed, as if the shape itself was breathing. Then it disappeared, not by fading, but as if it had been pulled into the stone. The basement was closed to visitors afterward, not because it was unsafe, but because someone was still waiting down there, and the investigators felt it too clearly. Despite all the investigations, tourist visits, and years of historical research, the Joshua Ward House never provided clear answers. It remained a place where the past refuses to let the present forget, and the deeper people dug into its history, the more obvious it became that the house doesn't just preserve memory. It seems ready to repeat it again and again. After the incidents involving the research teams, new security cameras were installed. On the very first night, one of them recorded something impossible on the 3rd floor. The heavy door of an old wardrobe opened on its own, and inside a silhouette flickered, narrow, sharp, shaped like compressed shadow. A few seconds later, an emergency light in the hallway flashed. Even though power to that section of the building had been cut, one longtime investigator claimed the Ward House had a strange habit of changing moods. Sometimes it felt quiet, almost indifferent, but at other times, every step in the corridor carried a faint echo, like a whisper repeating the movements of people who walked here centuries ago. This was most noticeable in the late hours, when the walls darkened and the windows turned black, as if covered in soot. Some visitors said they felt a breath behind them, cold, short, sudden. Others claimed they saw a man standing on the staircase in period clothing, watching silently, unmoving. But when they blinked, the figure was gone, as if it had never been there at all. Today, the house looks peaceful. The facade is well kept. The windows shine after restoration, and the street outside buzzes with tourists. But those who work inside say the same thing. Peace here has never meant silence. A house that witnessed blood, death, and decades of torment does not become harmless just because time has passed. It merely waits for the next person willing to hear its voice.